Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. And we're with Jeff Berkowitz of Public Affairs Television. Jeff, we're going to be reviewing, for the viewer standpoint, some of the major stories that are going on this week, as well as taking a look ahead. What's on your radar, Jeff?
Well, the main item nationally is the Biden economic team. We'll come back to this later as to whether it's truly over and Biden is now the president-elect. But assuming for purposes of this show at the moment he is, who is on the Biden economic team, and how do they contrast in their views in the large relative to what the Trump economic team? Because if our viewers are sitting there, and as you say, Terry, tell them what they need to know. They need to know how the economy is going to be affected by this team. And the team itself, the top seven, well, the most important person in general, title, National Economic Chair. So a little known 42-year-old Brian Deese, who's not been talked a lot of, he apparently is going to be the National Economic Chair. He is the Larry Kudlow of this administration. Kudlow was a well-known name, as you know, very impactful, was the key guy. I don't know if Deese will be that, but he is going to be nominated to be the National Economic Chair. But the person who's getting all the attention is, of course, Janet Yellen, because she is going to be the first female treasurer, secretary of the Treasury. But I don't think that's important. What's important about her is that she was she was Federal Reserve chief before. She was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. She's a credentialed economist. So she's really the key person in that economic team, as I see it. Wally Adeyemo he's getting some notoriety because he's the first Black Treasury Secretary. This administration is very identity politics, first Black, first women, etc. Other than that, I'm sure he's a fine gentleman.
Always stuck with me. So much so
he is the first Black Deputy Treasury Secretary. Okay? It's an important position, but I think
and communities. And I've spent my
to his color, his gender, etc., that type of thing. Moving right along, another really important person is Neera Tanden, because she will be the OMB, Office of Management and Budget Chief. She is likely to run into opposition from her own party because Bernie Sanders and those who are more progressive think she's not far enough left. On the other hand, she has to get approval in the Senate if the Republicans still are in control and have the majority. She's done a lot of things to bother Republican senators. She may have, all of these people have to get, they're nominated by the president, but they got to get approval by the Senate. And so most of them will fly through easily. Tanden may have trouble. And then you got the Council of Economic Advisors. The chairman is Cynthia Rouse. She is credentialed. She is fine. She will be workmanlike in what she does. She happens to be African American. And then you got Jared Berenstein, who's formerly a member of the Economic Advisors. He'll be again a member of Economic Advisors, and Heather Rousey. But the key players in that seven, key person, Janet Yellen. Will she stabilize markets? Do Republicans, conservatives have faith that she's establishment enough so she'll keep the economy going? But the more important thing, Terry, the more important thing is, what are the traits of these people? What are their views? What are they going to do? Well, they're all liberal, of course. They're all Keynesian. They're all big government spenders. They're all big taxers. They're all people who focus on not enlarging the pie. That's what Republicans are talking about. They're focusing on how do we divide up the pie? How do we take from one and give to the other? Really, they spend a lot of time on inequality, on various mandated programs. They're not believers in the market. This is a tremendous contrast to the economic team that Trump had. Elections have consequences.
Well, the Trump people were more market oriented. One of the things that Trump did in his first year is cut regulations. He cut a lot of regulations, and the Republicans would point out that the economy started moving faster when they did that. What we expect to happen during a Biden administration is that they would be imposing more regulations. Now, it brings us back to the two Senate races coming up in January in Georgia. If the Republicans hold the Senate, they can block a number of things that you need to do by law. The Republicans in December of 2017 cut taxes on both corporations and individuals. They would have to pass a law to undo those tax cuts. And if the Republicans have the Senate, that won't happen. But a President Biden can impose a lot more regulations across any number of industries. So that's a thing that I think a lot of people in the markets, in the Republican side, will be looking at. On the other hand, as we said, Janet Yellen, because she's well known, and I think those who are more conservative kind of welcomed her. They would have preferred to have other people, but given that they looks like we're going to have a Democratic president, I think the markets actually welcomed the appointment of Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary. And we would note when she was appointed, the markets actually went up significantly that day. And they've actually responded pretty well. Since the election, we've not had a sharp market sell-off on fears. Again, we'll have to see what happens in January with these elections.
As you would know, the market could be betting that the Republicans will keep control, will win the two runoff races for the U.S. Senate in Georgia, in which case they then have a 52-48 margin in the U.S. Senate, and therefore they block a lot of the legislation that Wall Street would be concerned about. That could be why the market, but if that does not happen, if the Democrats were to win those two seats, getting a 50-50 count in the U.S. Senate, with the vice president Harris being the person to break that tie, well, then I think the markets are going to sharply go down. We'll see if that happens. Number one, if the Democrats win those two races, and that, of course, that's on January 5 of the beginning of next year. But the point is, yes, the market has not fallen off yet because I think they're betting on gridlock. And gridlock in this case is fine, because as you point out, you don't raise taxes, but you do a lot of things that I think slowly over time the market will start discounting. I mean, we're right now at a Dow 30,000. I see somebody come out with a book soon.
That's a good thing to point out. This week, the Dow hit an all-time high of 30,000, which is, for those who don't follow, it means nothing. But I mean, that is huge.
It's a marker. It's a marker. It's not as reflective
of the economy and
right.
The overall, you might say, enthusiasm. The markets have done fantastic over the last 4 years, which the president has often pointed out. How many people remember the old joke? My 401k is now a 201k. That happened after when the crash of 2008. Now the joke would be my 401k is an 801k because the markets have gone up significantly.
Right. It's a phenomenon that most economists don't understand too well, because all of what you said made sense as of a year ago. But with COVID and the forced government, or the government choosing to shut down the economy, and unemployment at some point going to like 12, 14%, I think nationally it's back down to about 6% now. It's still double what it was just a year ago. So a lot of people would wonder why the market is so happy when the national economy is performing so much more poorly than it was a year ago. And I don't think anybody's really explained that very well. But you're right, the market is much higher than it would be based on the economic performance in the last year. And that does raise something
we should point out the jobs report for November came out today, December 4, as we tape this, and I believe it was 264,000 new jobs were created, which is a pretty good month normally. That was actually a little disappointing as far as what people were looking at. And the numbers are hard to compare because, as you say, this COVID economy, it's so screwed up. But that said, it's good that despite all this, and I think this goes to some of the policies that have been done over the last year, where we've had a huge input of money into the economy by the feds. These bailouts were, $1,200. Senator Durbin, as we tape this, said this morning that they're getting close to a new deal that would, at this point, as we tape this, not include $1,200 per person, but would include more money for some of the businesses. And so many of these businesses are struggling. So we either need to get some money back infused to keep these businesses from going under, or start to loosen the COVID restrictions.
Well, you're starting to sound more like a liberal now because that's what
Well, this
we
is
should be
this is
looking.
an extraordinary time. I mean, this is not where
I understand,
you
but
can't be comparing liberal and conservative economic theory in the realm of a pandemic. All bets are off. That's where you put the
well,
fire out first, and then you do.
no, Terry, you can because, and that leads to our next topic, which is COVID. Where are we? We'll come to that in a minute. But nationally, where we are is that there's a new economic team coming in, and the part of this new economic team and the new administration is how do they deal with COVID? And we would say these things, COVID has in large part been controlled by the governors of each state, but the president has a bully pulpit, and the Congress has an influence on how we deal with COVID and how we spend and tax, et cetera, and how much of a shutdown we have. And I think we've just heard this actually in the last 24 hours. The president elect is talking about a 100-day uh, a change in 100 days that we should maybe have a 100-day national mask mandate, maybe various, or have induce the states to have a mask mandate. So do various things for 100 days and somehow then it will be better. The problem with that whole way of thinking is it doesn't say, what are we trying to do, number one? And it relies on this crud of like the first 100 days, like there's some magic. There's no planning for the economy that there's some reason for do 100 days. So, in short, what I'm saying is if you still had Trump there as president, you'd be talking about how do you open up the economy and how do you target focusing on the problem with COVID. No, don't ignore COVID, but put your resources and the people who are most vulnerable. Let the others go about their business. So I think that leads to our second topic, which is COVID in Illinois. What should we be doing in Illinois? We'll come back to the national context. But in Illinois, what we know, and I think we know this throughout the country, but certainly we talk about that for Illinois, is that COVID is a disease primarily of the elderly and primarily of those with comorbidities. So 90% or so of people in the last 2 days, we've had, I think, 430 deaths, and 90% of those deaths are over 60 years or older. Okay. So why do we keep focusing on wedding groups that have people 20 somethings, teen parties? The retirement homes are producing half of the COVID deaths. Shouldn't the governor keep doing more and more to protect elderly at retirement homes, to protect those with comorbidities in retirement homes, to make sure that people coming into the retirement homes, whether they're guests or providers of food and so forth, are tested to make sure they don't go in if they're bringing COVID into these homes. But he's trying to jack up tests throughout the state. We're doing some days 100,000 tests a day, which is fine. But are we testing the right people? Are we prioritizing this? So this is what I'm saying. And Wire Points, you're putting up some charts now from Wire Points. So they're focusing on state issues, but these parameters that they're talking about exist in large part throughout the whole country. It says COVID is a disease of the elderly in large part. You can find some people in their 40s and 50s contracting that. Maybe they have significant comorbidities, asthma, pulmonary, respiratory conditions, morbidly obese. But if you're under 50 and you don't have those conditions, as you see there, if you get COVID, your case survivability rate, if you're 20 to 50, it's 99%. So the probability is don't focus. If you look at those probabilities, don't send the people who are you're locking down 20 to 50. Get them back to work. And in most cases they don't have to work remotely. Alcoholism, domestic violence. Government, as usual, made things worse. Okay, so why this mess? This is, and we're focusing on masks. We have a split on studies. Many studies say masks are effective, but a number say they're not. Initially, the CDC came out and said masks were not effective. So all I'm trying to say here in short is look at the data, look at the science, which our governor says, Governor Pritzker, and follow those data and focus, be prioritizing. And we should do that as a country as well. Let's get this economy moving. you can address COVID. And last thing I'll say is obviously we have vaccines that are kicking into gear in late December. As that happens, this COVID problem surely goes away if the vaccines are taken, which we suspect they will be, and if they're as effective as the tests say. And but the next month or two will be rocky because people are staying more indoors, and we suspect therefore it's more communicable. But again, if you look at the statistics, a lot of people get this and they're not really hurt by it. And we worry about
There is the
hospitals.
argument, we should say, that even if you don't die, the fact is right now we have a number of the hospitals having their ICU beds being filled and they're running out of capacity. So that is happening, and that's obviously a concern as far as the infrastructure of the some of the hospitals. I know in Missouri, in various cities around the country, that's happening. I think in Chicago, I'm not sure actually what the numbers are, but that's at least a concern. So it's not just that people are dying, but that people are getting sick, and to what extent are they filling up the critical care beds in our hospitals. So we
Well,
should
but two
mention
things.
that. Now, I would say, but as you mentioned, the vaccines are on the way. They are, I think, getting. England has given the okay. I saw some video in Germany where they're setting up, like in a big conference area, where they're going to be inoculating 10,000 people a day is the plan. So this is not just an American thing. This is going to be happening around the world. The Americans came out with the vaccine. We have, I think, about 3 of them right now, and they're applying for the FDA emergency approval. But again, these have been approved by some of the other nations. England this week did that. So that's the good news. I think if Joe Biden says we're all going to have to wear masks, I wear a mask if I go to the grocery store. I think most people do, but I think he's going to find out a lot of people are not going to be following that order very much. Hopefully we don't need it because we now have these vaccines. And I would say there's a lot of credit to be done for the president started Operation Warp Speed. This also goes to cutting red tape and getting the bureaucracy to move fast, as well as the great work by the American pharmaceutical industry to have come up with these vaccines in record time, something like 10
Well,
months.
presumably the states, which will be in large part the governors, and if they have functioning state legislatures, will decide how to prioritize who gets the vaccines. I'm sure there will be guidelines coming from the CDC, but these are tremendously important. Some of the people have suggested, well, the hospital workers in general should be the first to get. Well, it should be the hospital workers who are dealing with people who are COVID and hospital workers who are elderly and who have comorbidities. If not, the real priority should go again to the nursing homes. Vaccinate those people. That's where the deaths are occurring. And I guess again the elderly with comorbidities. So people need to start relying on the data. Everybody says this and then they don't look at the data. The folks who do, you've put up the charts, the folks at WirePoints, look at the data. And the second thing, when you mention hospitals, yes, that's important. But remember, we have probably 20% excess capacity in hospitals. They've arbitrarily
Well, they're not
started
all
cutting down here.
ICU
Now,
beds, though. I mean,
they're not, but not everybody with COVID needs an ICU bed. But we also have a significant excess capacity in ICU beds. And again, in beds in general, we have 75% of those people who are currently there for non-COVID issues. Some of those are important, cancer and so forth, and have to be addressed, but some of those are elective and can be deferred. So we have more, again, we're talking about getting through the next month or two because presumably the vaccines will be there and we're building up herd immunity. So through the vaccines and otherwise, because we have had so much testing and we now know we have so much COVID out there, we have some people are getting this, they're not getting sick often, but they are building up antibodies and immunity. So this is not a 10-year problem. This is primarily, looks like, an additional 2-month problem because of the vaccines on the horizon. And we should approach things that way, looking at what's effective. And the other thing is, what do we do to have the economy coming back? Because we can do that safely We can send kids back to school safely. And when we do that, we will have more resources to pay for some of these health issues that we still have on the horizon to deal with.
You know, the biggest impact here economically has been, as everyone I think realizes, in the hospitality industry, with the closing down of bars and restaurants and various things, Disney World, et cetera. But you know, someone pointed out the other day, in fact, Jeannie Ives, the congressional candidate and former Illinois House member, was noting that she flew to Washington, D.C. the other day, and she was sitting in between two strangers on a plane, and yet, you know, shoulder to shoulder, she can't go out and eat in a restaurant where you're typically going to be 6 to 10 feet apart. So
Right.
I think that one of the things is the criticism here is the illogic of so many of these policies. You can go out to a bar in some cities, but you can't go out to the bar past 10 o'clock, as if the science shows that after 10 o'clock you can be infected, but not before 10 o'clock. Again, what's the sense in this? We heard this just this week. We had a bunch of people protesting the closure of a bar in Staten Island, and they had police lined up so that no one could go into this bar, and the owner's pointing out that a block and a half away, in a different political district, the bars are open. So, you know, I think what we might want to point out while we are still in this environment is what we need from government is to have maybe just the injection of a little bit of logic instead of just showing in these little political fiefdoms how you can throw your weight around and what actually does make sense and what doesn't. And for heaven's
Okay.
sakes, let's open up some of these businesses before they're out of business.
Right. Maybe we can go on to topic 3, give people a little update on what's going on in Illinois with the ComEd scandal. We've heard this week because we remind people that ComEd, the government, the U.S. Attorney's Office, filed an indictment recently alleging that 4 people from ComEd, actually 5, Ann Pramaggiore, Mike McLean, John Hooker, Jay Doherty, and Ruben Marquez, all of those people from ComEd allegedly are involved in this conspiracy with the one person who wasn't named as a defendant in that lawsuit, which would be what they called public official A, and they referred to him as the speaker. That would be Mike Madigan. So that's the allegation that has been thrown out there now in the deferred prosecution agreement, in the indictment, is that in short, ComEd was looking for a way over the last 10 years to get favorable legislation from the legislature. Speaker Mike Madigan was the guy to do it, and they allegedly gave him things that he wanted. Gave money to Jay Doherty, who in turn gave money to political operatives, but it was disguised as money that was going to other lobbying and perhaps legal things by ComEd. So that was going on. The speaker wanted to help some law firms and assist them. Money was being funneled to them. The speaker wanted somebody on the ComEd board. That was arranged, and then that person was off. Those are the allegations. And a tremendous amount of time was spent on interns, getting internships for people from the 13th ward, the speaker's ward, and the 23rd ward to get ComEd internships and to help the aldermen, money for the aldermen, the precinct captain. And so what happened this week? The 4 defendants, one of the people I mentioned, Ruben Marquez, Fidel Marquez, was previously essentially pled guilty, but the other 4 pled innocent, and they were arraigned before Judge Leinenweber on December 2nd, and they all pled, as I said, pled innocent. And a hearing has been set now for February 16th. So one would imagine the wheels of justice will start turning now, discovery will start occurring. The government already produced a bunch of emails a week or 2 ago to the Special Investigations Committee of the Illinois Legislature. They will be producing a lot of this evidence, making it available to the defendants. The defendants will start knowing what does the government know, and we suspect they will start making deals. The first deal, I suspect, Ann Pramaggiore. If you can get Ann Pramaggiore to flip, the speaker's in major trouble, and I don't think Ann Pramaggiore wants to see how she looks in a jumpsuit. Okay, so
Well,
that's where things are.
that's the as you say, the U.S. attorney investigating this. Also, there is the investigative committee, the Illinois House set up. Republicans are still complaining. Representative Mazzocchi, one of 3 Republicans on that committee, again put out a statement this week saying that, where are the hearings? They're calling on Chris Welch, who is the Democratic chairman of that committee, to call the committee back in, and let's bring Speaker Madigan in to testify under oath. That's what the Republicans want. That's not happened. They're not even having any meetings because Representative Welch hasn't called any. So
clearly he's going to take
the other aspect that people should follow, what's happening in the Illinois House right now, in addition to the U.S. Attorney's investigation.
Okay, we just say in short, probably in the next 5 or 6 weeks, the House will vote and determine whether Speaker Madigan stays Speaker, he's running again, or somebody else. But let's go on shortly and give some reflections on the election, the Trump-Biden election. Is it over? Can we now say the president-elect is Joe Biden and he will be president on January 20th, inaugurated? It would seem so. December 14th, the electors meet. I'm almost surely they will do what they've been told to do by the election, if you follow the results and assume that they were kosher, so to speak. And Biden will be the nominee to be president. Biden will be the person designated as becoming president on January 20th. On January 6th, Congress will take some actions to certify that. So I think we can say, Terry, right now, it's over and that Joe Biden will be the next president. You agree?
Yes and no. I agree on the surface level that I expect Joe Biden is going to be the next president. I expect him to be elected by the Electoral College. But there's a big question that what I said to a number of people in discussing it. Of whatever party you are, it doesn't help us as Americans when we have such questions about whether an individual was legitimately elected. We had this 4 years ago with Hillary Clinton and many Democrats claiming Trump is not my president, wasn't, the election was stolen. And now we have the Republicans saying that. The Republicans who, the AP, had an AP reporter the other day saying there's no legitimate evidence of people engaged in fraud here. Well, Rudy Giuliani has been going around to about 4 different states this week where the states are holding hearings in Michigan and Georgia, and they've actually come up with quite a lot of very questionable activities that have gone on. We have just, let me quickly play a little bit of a video here. As you see, security cameras that were captured in Georgia where people were sent home saying we're going to be done for the night. And you see in the upper right corner, there's a black table in that shot, at the bottom of that shot. And what happens is this came out of the Georgia Senate hearings into possible election fraud, is that some of the people that stayed behind when they sent everyone else home started pulling out suitcases underneath that table. That's video, Republicans would say, video evidence of a very questionable vote counting on a number of these states. In that case,
before we run out of time, before you can do anything with that video, you have to authenticate it. If you were in a courtroom, you couldn't just put it up. You'd have to have the people who were there testify. They'd have to be subject to cross-examination. If you didn't authenticate it, that video would not be admitted. It would not be viewed as evidence, and you'd have to test it. So that's not evidence in the courtroom. And the short of it is, the Trump team did not do that. They did not approach this from the get-go. They could have a year ago.
Let me just say we're out of time, unfortunately, right now. So we're going to say goodbye. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. Don't forget to make your comments on YouTube.